Welcome to the Leadership Drip, coffee and conversations for leaders leading the next generation. We're excited to welcome another incredible guest to the table. But before we do, could you do us a favor and hit that subscribe button? While you're at it, go ahead and give us a 5-star review. That helps these conversations reach other great leaders. Pour yourself a cup of coffee and get ready to join us at the table for another great episode of the Leadership Drip. Hey, Rob, welcome back to the table at the Leadership Drip. It is a coffee kind of Friday here.
It is a coffee kind of Friday.
Well, it throws our guests off. Our listeners, we release on a Tuesday, but it's Friday in real life here.
But it's coffee every day. It's coffee Monday, coffee Tuesday.
Yeah, so no matter what day it is, drink your coffee.
Drink your coffee.
It's like a Flintstones vitamin. We are excited to welcome a new guest, a new friend of ours, Naeem Fazal, the founding pastor of Mosaic Church. Interesting story, he's Pakistani born and somehow ended up in Charleston, South Carolina. We'll get to that story. He was with Seacoast Church and then is an ARC church plant in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's the author of Ex-Muslim. And this is a first for us. He's a TEDx speaker.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've had a TEDx speaker.
One, yeah.
So obviously of high celebrity fame.
Absolutely.
Welcome to the table, Naeem.
No pressure here.
Wow. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Hey, man, it's you again. I know we talked just a little bit before the show, but I do remember several years ago, right after the city of Charlottesville riots broke out, you guys came out to Saddleback, was a part of a really kind of a racial justice sort of conversation for the church, and I know that you were a big part of that. So I just want to say thank you for your investment in diversity in the kingdom, and it just means a lot to me personally. So yeah, let's talk a little bit sort of your background, because it's not a typical background in terms of pastoral ministry, right? So you grew up in Pakistan as a Muslim, and then you came to America, and somewhere in the middle there, Jesus really got a hold of your heart. So I know our listeners would love to hear your story, because I think it's a fantastic story.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Story is it's unique and it's complicated. So here's the thing. I'm Pakistani. My parents are Pakistani, but I did not. I didn't grow up in Pakistan. So my parents actually migrated to the Middle East, which is Kuwait, in particular. And so it's an Arab country, to speak Arabic. And I was born and raised in Kuwait as a Pakistani. So my native language, my mother tongue, in a sense, is Urdu, and I speak it. Mm-hmm. That's my first language. But yeah, so technically, people are like, "You're from Kuwait," though. I'm like, "Yeah." But they don't kind of give out citizenships. So even if you're born there. So I'm kind of, and then they go, "Well, you're from Pakistan." I'm like, yeah, but I'm not really, because I speak it, I look it, but I never lived there.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yes. But yeah, I actually, so my story is complicated there, but then my brother, I have two brothers, two sisters, and my older brother got accepted to a college in the US. And so at this time we're all in Kuwait. We're really pumped about that. And he got accepted to a college in South Carolina, and it was a Methodist university. It was like Spartanburg Methodist University. Mm-hmm. And we were pumped about that. But we had no idea what Methodist meant, So we're like, okay, great, America, let's send him, Mm-hmm. So he comes here, and he comes back the next summer, and he just is convinced about becoming a Christian. Or actually, he says he's a Christian, and he's going to tell mom and dad, and he's no longer a Muslim, and I threatened to kill him. So that was my first reaction to this idea of the person of Jesus and all of that, and then he came back to the States because it was so bad, that incident, that he didn't tell mom and dad, and we didn't tell mom and dad, and so we just thought he was going through a phase, and so he came back, and then the first Gulf War took place in 1990, back in the day, and I was a teenager then, and I was in Kuwait. So we got stuck in a war. Iraq invaded us, and we were there. So we and my family, we ended up staying the entire time. So we were there from the occupation and the liberation in 91. And 92, I got to come to the States. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So obviously Kuwait and Charleston, South Carolina, where you kind of find yourself, are worlds apart. So what was that transition like, going from being a Pakistani in Kuwait to now being a Pakistani in the deep south of Charleston, South Carolina?
Yeah. So first of all, I didn't know there was such a thing as deep south. You know,
right. You learned fast, I bet.
Yeah.
Well, you know, what's funny is I would see these stickers everywhere, like on trucks or bumper stickers, you know, that, you know, the South will rise again and things like that. And I obviously did not grow up with American history. So this whole time I thought the South won.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I was like, well, they're obviously so proud of it. They obviously won, right? And then my brother was like, no, they didn't. So it's complicated. It's messy. And I was like, oh, okay. All right. So all that to say, I did not know I was in the South. I was like, this is the US. You know, you just think the whole thing is, this is how Americans act. Also, my context is Kuwait is as big, the whole country is as big as like Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Like it is small. So you could drive around the whole country in 2 hours, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're going from there to the US. So, but I learned quick, like, okay, this is not what I saw in the movies, you know, growing up.
Right.
So I kind of got figured that. But then, but I quickly got introduced to like the whole Jesus culture, you know, because of my brother, because he was still a Christian when I got here in 1992.
Yeah. So you know, obviously at some point then you obviously gave your heart to Christ as well, and you know that was a whole experience for you. You know, one of the things that we certainly do appreciate coming from your perspective is there's a lot of stereotypes, a lot of misinformation about the Muslim world, about Muslim people, about their faith systems, or you know, so as a believer, you know, as someone who's a follower of Christ, but who came from a Muslim world legitimately, what are maybe some of those things that you can say, hey, as believers, we need to be careful of, or things that we need to pay attention to? Maybe what are some of those, I don't know, stereotypes perhaps that we need to kind of debunk so that we can continue to be better, you know, followers of Jesus as we love on the Muslim population and the Muslim people? Like, how do we do that better, I guess, is my ultimate question there.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, so my conversion, I mean, and obviously you can get the book or YouTube or Google me and all that, and it was quite supernatural, you know,
right.
Where, you know, and so I think what I did not realize is that after I came to faith, so, you know, I had like this vision of Jesus and all that, like kind of a road to Damascus experience, like Paul did in the New Testament. So when that happened, I realized that the churches I was going to didn't really have language or didn't know how to explain my conversion, which is really strange to me. You know, in particular, then it was more conservative denominations, and so they didn't really believe that stuff really happened. So what I would say is that, you know, in trying to communicate or understand how Muslims or people from a different world enter into the story of the gospel, you have to realize that, you know, the way we've done church is not the way God moves. Like, you know, like the way, that order of service, you know, this is what happens. Now you have the altar call, now you have that. That's not how God moves at all. And God speaks when he wants to speak. And, you know, it's like, you know, how Jesus said, it's the wind of the Spirit. He goes wherever he wants to do, goes, you know, does whatever. I think, number one, to understand that people from different faiths, especially Muslim faiths, God speaks to them in profound ways. And what we have to do is make them curious about it. Because I think sometimes we just go, if we just tell them accurately and clearly what the gospel is, they'll believe. And it's not actually true. It's making people curious instead of making it very clear and bold about the gospel. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. And so, I think it really leads into a good question. And I love this quote. And I don't know if it's your quote or if it's from your book. To be quite honest, I haven't read the book, but I don't know if it's your quote or if it's just one you pull from someone else. But I think you're tracking right down a conversation that I would really like to have, and that's that you say, or at least it's on your site, that Christ didn't die on the cross so that we could become Christians. He died on the cross so that we could become the church. And I mean, that's such a profound statement, because I think, especially in our Western,
that had to be me. That had to be me.
Yes,
it's that profound. It has to be
profound. If it's profound, but I think it's, I think especially in our Western American context, we believe that the salvation point is the apex of the Christian faith, and it's really not. It's just really the starting point. And I think in our discipleship mechanisms, we really need to maybe shift some of the focus of that. So kind of unpack that statement for us a little bit, because I think it's powerful. I think there's some truth in there that we need to dig out.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's my quote. I was joking about it, but yeah, I think what I realized is that coming from a different faith, I realized that, when you read the scriptures with not a lot of assumptions, and you begin to see some truths in there that you go, oh, I didn't realize this. Like, for example, like just learning to even read the scriptures, realizing that that scriptures are written by not Western people. They are written in not a non-Western context, and that almost all the scriptures are written to a people group and not to a person. And so, when in the Western world, what usually happens is that it's about the individual. And so I grew up in Pakistan and Kuwait, both Eastern cultures, and your identity is connected to the group that you're a part of. Like my dad's name is not just Muhammad Fazal. He was Abu Mahmud, which is the father of Mahmud. Like the notorious person, popular, sadly, was Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden, means son of Laden. So it's not even a real name. Does that make sense?
Right.
All that to say that the identity, our corporate identity in the Eastern world is so much more relevant and and part of people's formation, that if you remove that, then you miss a whole lot of what the stories and the lessons and the philosophies and the teachings of that culture. So when you take the scriptures, you understand, okay, so Jesus here, Jesus was a Jewish guy, but he spoke Aramaic for most of his life. Some of the Jewish people didn't even speak Hebrew. They spoke Aramaic because of Babylonians and all kinds of things in their history. But there was continually a story of them being a collective. And so most of the scriptures are not written to a person, they're written to a people. And most of the promises that God has said that we've taken and made them personal, they're written to a people. And that's why, honestly, some of them don't work, which people, I think this next generation is coming and going, well, it doesn't work, because, like, for example, even the popular ones where God makes everything come together for good, right? Well, we've taken that, plastered it everywhere, believe it. And I'm not saying that we should not hold on to truth and God's faithfulness. Not the point. But the point is that is taken out of context when you say it's that God will make everything work out for me.
Right.
Which is not true.
Yeah.
Because people have died believing that. And people have and people live in despair and even bitterness towards God believing that. And so that's when we shortchange the gospel. That's when we take the power of the scriptures away, when we misread them and misapply them. So because again, we are so, and what I love about the U.S., I love about the Western world, that I'm not confined to my past, right? I can make my own identity in a sense. I'm independent. But honestly, in the story of God, we're not really supposed to be independent. Even right now in our church, because I'm a senior pastor, and we're doing a series right now talking about becoming church, which you guys was talking about. And the whole idea is that we've been told from day one, in not just in culture, but in actually in Christian culture too, that God wants you to live your best life. And right. I mean, he wants you to live the biggest life you have. Like we're all called to live these extravagant lives. And again, I'm a very positive guy, so I don't want to knock this or throw any shade on this. But the whole idea of the best is yet to come. Like God's gonna bless you, and God's called you to be a leader, and God's called you to have all this success, and God's called you to live this big life. And when you take all that, it sounds so good, and you want to believe it, and a lot of people do believe it. But then when you look at that in the teachings of Jesus, you go, hold up, what? Doesn't line up. And the way I like to say it is that God never intended us to live or write a big story. He does call us to find our lives in a big story, and in fact, the biggest story.
That's
and
good.
When you and I, and when even people, Jesus followers, realize that every one of us have a part to play in the biggest story, and it's a significant part, but it's not the biggest part, because the biggest part is Jesus. He took it. You can't apply for that position, but. And we're all significant, but again, we're working towards the big story.
Yeah.
I think it sets some people free from despair. It sets them free from the hustle. Like, hey, I gotta live this big life.
Yeah.
And I don't have enough faith, and I'm not holy enough. I don't have the talent. And these people on social media are living these amazing lives, and they're writing this beautiful, amazing story, and that's all shallow, and that's not even true. But yeah, does that make sense?
It does, and it brings up a really interesting discussion and question. I think both attention and an opportunity. Rob's here on campus with Gen Z students. Our church primarily has a focus on young adult demographic, so we interact with a lot of like 18 to 25-year-olds who are caught in this tension of a collaborative kind of collective culture and that sort of American dream of being somebody. So how are you wrestling that out in your church and in your ministry of helping even older Gen Xers like us sort of understand that the tension of the collaborative and the church are really maybe running in the same vein?
Yeah. And that's a hard question. You promised me not.
in the email, yeah, it's like a bait and switch type thing.
Hey, it's just gonna be easy.
Real easy,
Naeem. Not a big deal.
Just coffee. We drip coffee.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like what? Well, number one, I don't know.
Okay.
Number two, I think the idea of like redefining what responsibility looks like. I think there is if you break it down, it comes with, like, I think some people take responsibility as authority, and some people take it as kind of like a cause or a purpose, or something that they have to steward. I think sometimes in the Christian world, you go, God's given you all these gifts, He's given you all these things, and now you're responsible. So you go like, okay, so I'm responsible, as in I've got to do this. I've got to, I have authority over these things. God wants me to fulfill my life and my purpose. And I think that the people who realize really quick that my purpose is not like the end all be all, as in my purpose is not the end. So I have responsibility to live out and to exercise and to do the things I need to do to steward my gifts that God's given me. But it's not necessarily to fulfill how do I say it this way? Like, so my purpose, I would say my purpose is a means to God's end.
That's good.
But I think what people think is, no, God, like God's going to give me the gifts to fulfill my purpose in life. So that's where we think that everything that's given to us, the Holy Spirit, the gifts, opportunities, favor, all that is for you to live out your best life, or you to live out your purpose, which I don't know if it's true.
Right.
Honestly.
Yeah.
I don't think even satisfaction comes from there, because you hit the goal, the big goal, and then what happens? Then you're bored. Then leaders, even very successful pastors have found themselves in a place. They get to the point where they thought they'd never get to. They got there. They got the congregation, the influence, the book deal, all of those things, and then they go, "Well, this is not enough." And then they start getting weirder and weirder. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, because I think it's like realizing I have to be responsible for my spirituality, my gifts, all of that, because fulfilling my responsibility is a means to God's end, God's purpose.
Yeah, I think that.
I want to ask you like a biblical question in a political framework. So I think as Americans, we don't understand kingdom because we live in a democracy. Like we always get to vote the leader in. And so obviously you lived in some sort of hierarchical difference, like Kuwait, and that would have a crowned king or a dictator or somebody you weren't voting in. Do you think maybe our socio-political understanding of life here in America, the democracy that we get to vote somebody in, affects our understanding of the kingdom of God, that we don't have a perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that humans, I have always been fond of having certain people in charge, and to govern them, and then complain about how they are being governed, right? So that's kind of like the idea of like how, like, so Israel, the story of God would be is like God wanted to be their king, but they wanted a king, so God gave them a king, right? So then you've got fast forward right now, what we're living with is political systems that we put so much emphasis on. Why? Because we're like, they govern the people, and that's how governed people should be governed. And then we argue about what kind of government is the best way to govern people. So all of that is removed from God's kingdom, because in God's kingdom, the way it works is the Good Samaritan. You are the neighbor to everybody else. Like this is supposed to be like God's kingdom is. I know it seems like it's not even. It can't even work this way, but His kingdom is you are governed by like my spirit. You are called to treat your neighbor and take care of your fellow person. And I know it sounds strange because it's like, can that even work?
Right.
But like when you look at the teachings of Jesus, I mean, especially in Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, I mean, it's basically a structure of how to govern yourself and actually treat the people around you, where you might not need a certain kind of government. Does that make sense? Because each and every person is responsible for taking care of each and everybody else. I mean, right now you've got so much. Right now I was reading an article this morning, actually, in Africa, where doctors and nurses in Africa, certain part of Africa, are having to beg for food because they don't have food, but they take care of people.
Right.
And the problem is not that there's not enough food in Africa. That's not the problem. It's the people who don't want to give. Like, it's distribution. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think if we were to understand that God wants to govern us by giving us His Holy Spirit to live inside of us, and then He wants us to be responsible for each and every person. See, that's why I think it's connected to the whole idea of Christianity versus being the church. Like, if you and I were told day one, hey, by the way, you don't just, pray this prayer, you get into heaven. No. You now sign up. Like you just got drafted.
Yeah.
Like like what would that look like then? All of a sudden, now you are responsible for every other human, to love them and to care for them.
Yeah.
We won't sign up for that then. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. No, I just thought this was for me and my security here and eternal. I didn't know I was being drafted. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does completely make sense. I mean, I mean, love the Lord your God and love others as yourself. I mean, it's right there in the greatest commandment that we want to love God and we want God to love us. But the others piece, I think, is the missing piece in church sometime. But I think at the same point, there's a generation who is really bent on loving others that don't see it in the church.
Well,
that makes sense.
I think for me, what's kind of being pointed out is we're not necessarily moving towards a collectivist culture. I think maybe we are moving towards a more universalist culture, like all things are acceptable. But I do think that we're moving closer to a collectivist faith in the Western culture.
Hope so.
Because I think both from the not in the persecution of biblical sense, but maybe in some cases, yes. But certainly in the Western American context, I think the social persecution or the cultural persecution is creating opportunities for us to respond in a more collectivist way as a body of faith. So we had a conversation with Chris Estrada recently on the show, and we talked a lot about sort of not being anti-denominational. Those pieces serve their structures, but I think also at the same time, what we're finding are, especially in Gen Z, especially like with students on our campus, it's not the primary. It's not the thing that is first on their list in terms of what it means to be a follower of Jesus.
Well, on the list, actually.
Right?
Many,
yeah, maybe not even on the list. But what really is maybe this more cause-oriented, maybe this more collectivist sort of front where this generation is seeing that, hey, you know what's most important is that I understand how to work with someone else who's a fellow believer. Why? Because there aren't that many of us, right? It's a different price to pay at this point for being a follower of Jesus. And so I think what's really cool is this conversation about, being saved to be a Christian or being saved to be the church. Man, that's a completely systematic seismic shift in the cultural identity and ideology of how we actually function on a Sunday to Sunday basis. Yeah, right. And I hope more of us are getting it, because I think there's a lot of power and a lot of virtue.
I think
there.
The other side of it is what Naaem is saying. We're saved to love others. We're not loving others minus the gospel.
Right.
Like, which I think is happening in a lot of places. Yeah. Like, we're going to serve others minus the gospel.
Nothing to do with the condition of this world that I live in. Like,
right.
And we just ignore doing good because we're focused on, just being good or whatever. Like, so I think getting them together, understanding that, hey, and telling the students and going, no, this is actually connected. You might have heard something that's incomplete. But when you listen to the teachings of Jesus, let's go back to that. It actually is both. It really is both.
Yeah.
And so I was an art major in the College Charleston early on, and then I switched. But so I don't know if you guys know the story of Starry Night. So Starry Night by Van Gogh. You guys know what it looks like?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Everybody knows that. Most everybody. So you know that some people believe that Starry Night was an indictment against the church. So Van Gogh was a pastor. He was a pastor, and he has his own congregation. If you look up his autobiography by Ivan Stone, "The Lust for Life," it's an excellent one. It's thick, but it's worth it. And he goes into just the story of Van Gogh. So he tells about the fact that he was a pastor. He had his own congregation, and he was by a denomination sent to a certain town. He lived in that town, and then his denomination had a way of doing things, and it was a very proper way of doing things. And he moved away from that and then began to actually live not in the apartment that the church provided, but actually live with the people. And he opened up the church for a lot of other things. His services looked different. And one night there was a fire, and he opened up the church, and there were 30 people who died. And he opened up the church as became basically, first response center. And his overseers came that evening as well, and they saw what happened. and they saw what he was doing, and he had ripped out his parts of his priestly attire and was wrapping babies up and all kinds of things. Anyways, the next week they fired him because they were like, "Oh, you have lost the sanctity of the house. Like you're becoming just like one of these people you're trying to save." And he was like, "That is the point, right? That we become like them, like we live in their world." So that led him. He got fired. That led him in a very dark place. So Starry Night is an indictment because if you look at the painting again, every building in that, every home in that painting has light, and the whole painting is about light. But the only building that does not is the church. Wow. So Van Gogh was saying that even though the church wants to be in the center of everything, which it is in the painting, it has no light in it.
Wow.
There's all light and his hope all around the world. And then, the giant tree that he put up there? Yeah. The giant tree is basically him saying that there's more organic love and hope that reaches the heavens, and the steeple is just pretending.
Wow.
So I think this, I know.
That'll preach.
So, right. So this generation, they don't even know it, but it's like all the Van Goghs. They're like, why would we go to the church? Because it's the only place that does not have light.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us as a church, we're like, hey, we got to reclaim the message in the movement of Jesus. We got to put the light back in the church. Like we have to show people that no, there's actually more light. Like we are called to be light, you can't, but I mean, I'll just say one more thing, but the light that God is talking about is not like God, like human manufactured light that we provide by our own intellect and by our own technology. And that is what the next generation is going to go into. They're like, we'll figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
Because we can figure out everything. Mm-hmm. It's not supposed to be that. It's supposed to be like, he didn't say, I will give you a light to carry around. He said, you are light. Like the word there is, I mean, I don't even know if I can say it. It's luminescent, like you glow from within.
Yeah.
Like that will change the world.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
That's great, man. Love it.
I know it's abstract, but
I think it's a great conversation because I think it echoes so much of what we're seeing in terms of young adults engaging in the church, the questions that we ask, how do we get them there? How do we get them to stay? How do we get them activated in the local church? I mean, all these are great conversations, but I think you're actually hitting on it because it's not that they don't desire the light. It's not even that they don't want to reflect the light. It's just it's just not going to look the same as it does to our traditional systems and models and understanding of what the church, the quote unquote church is. Right. So when you start talking about changing entire sort of mechanisms and systems and traditions and again, traditions aren't bad, right? That's not the case either. But when you start messing with those things, that's where the tension comes in because you've got leaders who are, older like us, right? Can we just say that plainly? Like we're very accustomed, we're very disciplined in how we do church. And sort of that disconnect is that we're not sure that the church is going to look the same, 15, 20 years from now. But I don't know that it has to. You know what I'm saying? Like, we might not have the answers, but I don't know that we need the answers because I think what I'm seeing across at least our campuses and other campuses is that light is burning extremely brightly in the hearts and the lives of students who are sold out for Jesus. They're not afraid to show it. They just don't know how to carry it in the sense of being, strategic or mechanized or ordered or whatever. It's so organic. It's so sort of, spontaneous almost. And I think we're having a hard time of grasping how to grab a hold of it and roll. You know what I'm saying? So
I think in their youthful energy and then sometimes zealousness that comes out very prideful when you're in your 20s, because I was in my early 20s.
Never.
You don't know how to fit into the church culture. Like you feel like such an outsider. Like I got this zeal for the Lord and the church doesn't have that. So maybe help us understand how can we incorporate that light. I think the Van Gogh painting is a great representation. and make it a part of the, not the building the church, but the larger church conversation that I think we started having? Like, how do you sort of gather those lights and then maybe release them?
Yeah. Yeah. I think one is like this idea of like really discipling people, like beginning with people to go, okay, what kind of church are we going to become?
Right.
Number one, I mean, again, like I know it sounds great, but man, just it changes your worldview, philosophy, even changes the gospel for you in a sense when you go, hold up, I'm the church. I'm the church. I'm not Christian. I'm the church.
Mm-hmm.
Way more responsibility, way more, oh God, this matters. Not what's good for my church. No, what's good for the kingdom. Are we moving it forward? So I think it starts with discipleship. The first thing I think what at least I try to do is go, okay, so again, it's connected to my story, so I can't get away from that. But I early on, I felt God ask me a question, and basically the question was, do you recognize me out of context? And it was an interaction I had with a person at a random Target. I did not recognize them because they were out of context. And I just began to really think about that and study that and focus on that for years. And I realized, man, my biggest regret would be to live my life not being able to recognize God out of context. That is what the Pharisees were guilty of more than anything else. God was right in front of them, and they did not recognize him. And I think if we raise up a next generation who does not recognize God out of context, we're going to be in trouble. Because right now they're like, yeah, I don't see God in any of this. I don't see God in any of this. Because what we've been taught is like, we know how he looks like, or what he did, how he moves in prayer meetings and services and gatherings and church conferences. We know, we're like, oh, God's all over her, all over him. But then I don't know where is God from the guy who's drunk, clearly drunk, and shouldn't be. Well, how do you talk? Is God even working there? Like,
right.
Is he God forsaken? And I think if we can teach people, number one, man, we have to learn to recognize God in people's lives. Like, he is at work.
Yeah.
And that's huge. You know what that is? That's taking Colossians, where Colossians, it says, everything was made in him and through him and by him and for him. We live and breathe in him. Basically, everybody has a God DNA. So what if we were taught our next generation of the church and said, hey, let's not put in Jesus. Let's call out Jesus from within them.
Yeah.
Let's go, hey, because so often the gospel and evangelism has been, we're going to go give them Jesus. Yeah, but what if we were to call it out of them? Because that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, when I tell Muslims, hey, I think Jesus is already talking to you, and they go, what do you mean? I don't even believe in him. I said, I know, but I think that's Jesus talking to you. And I have seen people convert and converse. I mean, mind-blowing conversation. They go, you know what? Someone is talking to me. I'm like, yeah, I know. That's Jesus. Like, oh, but I thought I need to go get him. I need to believe in him. And then he starts talking to me. I'm like, no, this guy. He'll start talking to you right now.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And so I think when people go, hey, if we teach the next generation, hey, we can call Jesus out. I think that changes the game for a lot of people. And so I know at Mosaic, we try to do that. We go, you might feel like, I actually kind of go, the whole idea of like reaching people far away from God. I'm like, no one's far away from God. I'm like, because people make that as an excuse not to have a conversation with God. I'm so far, I'm so far away. I'm like, no, you think you are.
Right.
He's actually inside of you. Like if he were to leave you, you would stop breathing. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
That, like, we don't even know what it means for God to leave us. It is the breath of God that we actually breathe. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like if you take away all the like, I think when people, that's so much more inviting, right? Yeah. So much more like, hey, we're in this together. I might know a lot more of him. You need to know this person of Jesus. Like this person of Jesus who talked about the God who's given you breath. You might have so many different views of who this God is. And there's so many cultures, and there's so many traditions, and there's so many religions. But you need to look at what Jesus said about this God. Like he calls him Father. Like there's something about that. I think when you start changing the language and showing people that they've been born, on purpose with the breath of God who's been wanting a relationship with them, a relationship that will change their life and also change the world through them, man, it changes everything it changes the world, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've got a lot of stuff going through my head right now because in some ways it's common sense. You're like, no, I mean, Colossians. Yeah. Right. We get it. Like, we understand the things, but to actually implement or to actually activate the things changes our entire philosophy and worldview, I think is what you're saying. So, and it also creates, I think, a much more cultivating relational sort of Jesus follower experience than one that necessarily requires you to attain some specific skill set, right? So if you talk to a lot of people that don't share their faith, they don't share their faith because they think they have to give people something, right?
Yeah, you're selling them something.
You're selling them something. Like, even if it's just your own story, you're still selling the story. Like, hey, God did this in my life, and this is the new change, and that's all great. But you're still selling them something. But I think if we were to reverse, or not reverse, but invert or shift or whatever the word is you want to use to refocus how we approach people from a cultivating conversation, it also takes all the weight and responsibility off of you. To call something out of someone that's already there, their divine DNA, which I fully believe, right? That God created them for purpose, for purpose, on purpose, right? And I truly believe in it. What only thing you're doing is actually calling out of them something that's already there. And that takes a lot of personal weight off of you, right? In terms of being able to sell someone Jesus, or you know what I'm trying to say? So I think it really shifts the entire dynamic of what it means to evangelize.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And the calling out is not just one time. See, once you do that, then you're used to like, hey, that is what, brotherhood, sisterhood, that's what the church does for each other. We always call more of God out of us. Like, so it's not supposed to be one conversation.
Right. Yeah, I think then the shift, and maybe it's not the best word for it, I don't know yet, I haven't decided, is that, like you said, we have to become better recognizers. Is that a verb? I made it up. Recognizers, maybe. Recognizing, better at recognizing. Maybe that's it. Better at recognizing.
Our English is superior.
I have a master's degree. It's okay.
As an expert in the language,
I would say. So better at recognizing the God that is in them all along, so we can call that out. So maybe is that our responsibility, or maybe something we need to develop is recognizing the God that we wouldn't normally recognize. Like you mentioned the Target story.
That's a great question.
Is that a responsibility of ours? And if so, how do we go about learning to see God where we don't expect him?
Oh gosh. That's not to me, right? You were just kind of asking that.
Maybe our audience has an answer.
Next time you're on the show, we'll talk about video games. We'll talk about favorite vacation destinations.
I thought this was about coffee.
Are you black drip? Like, are you a latte kind of guy? Like, where are you at on the spectrum?
Don't patronize me. No, I mean, these are. I think these are the questions. I mean, I think there's a lot of trial. I I think you got to get over the idea of you have to get it right with God. I got introduced to Christianity. I started attending a Southern Baptist church because my brother was going there. I woke up in the middle of the sermon one day, and I thought this cannot be right. I was like, this cannot be, because I had a supernatural experience, and my book goes into the stories of like demonic stuff and all that stuff I could not even understand. So then I started looking into different churches. Then I was full on Pentecostal at one point, and then did the whole circuit, kind of thing. I feel like, so I think that in all of those, even this idea of like wanting to get it right when you hear from God is a big burden. Sometimes it's like, I just got to get it right. And God does not want you to get it right. Like he never expects you to get it right. Like he always he expects us to misunderstand him.
Yeah.
Like here's why, because he's like, even if I told you my thoughts, you would not get them.
Yeah.
Like, because my ways are higher than yours. So just do the best. What you hear, do it, and I'll use it. I'm always cleaning up like your mess. Okay. It's not going to stop. You're never going to not. Like there'll be one day that, you'll know me as I know you, but that is like another dimension there. But as of right now, you don't see clearly. So just go for it. So I think that if we get the idea out of like, we got to get it right, I think we'll have a lot more conversations. I've talked to people who go, I've kind of said, I think God's working, and sometimes they shut me down, and other times they open wide up. And then being open to the supernatural. Really, guys. I can't tell you how many supernatural things have happened. And what I mean by that is, I'm like, I'm in the middle of a conversation. I'm like, why are you telling me this? And then they go, why am I telling you this? Or how do you know this? Or why did you say that?
Right.
The human spirit is always, it's like, how it says that there, like, all of creation is groaning, right?
Right.
Well, we are all of creation too. So like, what that means is there's something inside of us, even in our subconscious level, is that's always wanting to hear from our creator. Like, so every human is, even though they might be like going the opposite direction, there's a constant conscience of like, what is your conscience anyways, if not a antenna for God to speak, right? So it's wanting to hear. So I think there are so many people in people's lives, like they don't even know, but they want to know. Like they want to know. They might not want to know Jesus because they have this, again, they've got this Van Gogh idea of Jesus, I'm going to walk away. I don't want anything to do with the church. But I might be just rambling here, but I think like the understanding and knowing that people want the conversations about Jesus and about what God's doing should be normal. I don't know.
The supernatural should be normal. Right. The supernatural should not be fringe experiences for a select group of people who have prayed through certain, bondages or whatever, right? That is a type of supernatural reflection of who God is. But the supernatural piece itself, by the very nature of the fact that we are followers of Jesus, indwelled by the power of the Holy Spirit, we carry the supernatural with us, right? And those encounters that you're talking about, those people encounters, those seeing Jesus out of context encounters, those are supernatural realities. And you don't know. And I say this a lot. I say to the students a lot here, every single day of your life, God will put someone in your path who needs to know and experience the love of Jesus if we're willing to see it every day. There's not a person that you won't encounter somewhere in a store or in a restaurant or whatever who doesn't need, but are we available for those supernatural promptings to allow God to move us into those conversations. So
I think we may not see the super in the natural, like, you know what I mean? Like, we may just be an expression of love to somebody, and that person's going, how did they know that I needed that? A friend of mine was telling me a story, and I'll tell the story, and we'll go back to the questions, but they needed a bass player for their church, and they were at a coffee shop, and they said, this is what they said. A friend of mine, I guess, it was their team, like, the next person that walks by, we're going to ask them if they play bass guitar. And they're at a coffee shop, the guy walks by, and they go, by chance, do you play bass guitar? And the guy goes, yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. And they're like, come to church next Sunday. Well, he comes to church, tries out whatever, eventually gives his heart to the Lord. And the story comes out that day he was contemplating suicide.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't know that day, but 8 or 10 months later, they find out that their natural was a supernatural expression. And so sometimes we just have to do the natural, let God work out the super part.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. We say at Mosaic, we have to learn to be naturally supernatural.
Yeah.
Like just, we don't have to be like, thus saith the Lord.
Yeah.
And I felt,
it doesn't need to be manufactured.
Yeah.
It doesn't. Yeah. It doesn't need to be manufactured. So, man, we're running out of time, and I really, really would like to carry on the conversation. But there is one final question we ask all of our guests on the show, and we're going to ask you right now. It is a little bit softer of a question, right? A little bit easier.
It's about coffee.
It's not about
you
coffee,
can answer about coffee,
but you can answer about coffee if you so desire. So the final question is this. What is one lesson that you learned in college that did not take place in the classroom?
Oh. Shoot, all the lessons. I mean, but
all of them.
I mean, yeah. What did I learn? What lesson did not in the classroom? Well, I think the idea of like. I know it'll be sounding weird, but just hustling.
Yeah, cool.
Like, as in hard work.
Yeah.
I think college, again, my college experience was very different because I came here, then I was a refugee, then I was illegal for a while, then I was working 3 jobs, and then I had to take classes in 3 different colleges, and then finally graduate from the College of Charleston in 6 years. So this is very different. But honestly, I mean, in the classroom in college, it was more like, I'm going to find myself. And that whole find myself, or I got to figure out what I love and what I do. I mean, I think what I did not learn there was, no, you got to figure out what you're going to give your life to. You got to figure out the kind of person you're going to become, not the kind of person what you're going to do. And so I think for me, that was the big thing. Like, it was not in the classroom that I struggled with a lot of it. What kind of person am I going to be, instead of what do I need to do as a job kind of thing.
Yeah. That's
cool.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
Man, Naeem, it's been
a
real pleasure to have you on the show. I want to make sure we mention the book again. It's Ex-Muslim. I'm sure you can find it on Amazon or anywhere else books are sold. We touched on the story, but that's the in-depth version.
Yeah.
I recommend putting it on your reading list, on your Kindle. Buy the hard copy, whatever you can do to get your hands on it. And as we always say here at the Leadership Drip, you have a seat at the table. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Leadership Drip. If something from this episode was helpful for you, then share it on your social media and tag us. If we see it, we may reshare it on our channels. We appreciate you taking the time to join us, and remember, you always have a seat at the table.